The Unrelating podcasts are meant to be for education and entertainment. They don't constitute a service or advice. For personal struggles, please reach out to a medical or mental health professional.
You know, Michelle, I consider you a friend. Am I a friend?
Yeah, absolutely. I consider you not just a friend, but a real friend.
Yeah, and that's something that's, it's hard to find because let's be honest. I mean, finding friends and keeping friends, it's a lot of work. And I think everybody can relate to that. Everybody can relate to that problem.
Yes, and there's so much effort in the front end of it, and it's really hard to navigate meeting a new person and making yourself vulnerable enough to make that intimate connection with someone else, especially later in life. And so we'll see how it goes with our next guest.
Yeah, I think people are going to learn a lot from today's episode. I'm really excited about this guest.
Me too. I think they'll be able to relate a lot too.
Welcome to Unrelating with Kel and Michelle, and I'm one of your hosts, Kelly. With me is my co-host, Michelle, a licensed marriage and family therapist who's been providing individual and couples therapy for over a decade. Together, we'll explore how we engage in relationships, why we do what we do, and what causes people to unrelate.
Joining us today is Jason. Jason from Philadelphia. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm doing well. Thank you guys for having me. I'm looking forward to everything we talk about.
So today's topic is something that's near and dear to my heart and something I'm sure a lot of men can relate to. Making friends, keeping friends, especially as we age, and the disintegration of friendships as we age. So Jason, talk a little bit about your situation, what your background is.
So I was an Army brat until I was 10. So I was born in South Korea. My brother was born in Tacoma, Washington. We spent our early childhood in West Germany, in Karlsruhe, which is like in Southwest Germany. And then when my dad went into the reserves for a little bit, we lived in my dad's home state in upstate Minnesota. And then when my dad left the Army, his first huge job was down in Kentucky. So we moved down there, and that's basically where I call home. That's where my parents still live, and my brother. It was just me and my brother and my parents. And as a as a biracial person growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, there was like pretty much I didn't really meet another biracial person until I think college. I definitely met single ethnicity people, but that was just something you kind of just thought you were a unicorn. And then when you did meet one, it was kind of an interesting experience. It was almost like not really looking in the mirror, but you'd have this like laundry list of questions that you've just been waiting to ask someone with similar life experiences, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, my mom did want me to play piano." I was like, "Me too," things like that. So, so just things like that. But yeah, that's the short end of it. But yeah, so I went to college at Villanova, and after Villanova, that's when the housing crisis hit. So I was looking for a job. I was kind of couch surfing. I should really still send presents to the people who let me couch surf around Philadelphia, because I don't, we were all broke at the time. So, but at one point my mom calls me. So I was basically living out of my car, but couch surfing, and my mom calls me and she's like, "Your dad's been in a motorcycle accident. He was rear-ended by a truck. You need to come home." And all my stuff was in my car, and it's about a 10-hour drive from Philadelphia to Louisville, which people on the East Coast have no idea how close Kentucky is. Like, people will be like, "Well, where's Kentucky?" And I'm like, "It's 2 states over." And they will literally want to slap you in the face for lying to them. And they'll look at a map. They'll look at a map and they'll be like, "Oh my God, it is 2 states over. I thought it was like by Kansas."
Yeah.
So I got in the car, drove home. I'm expecting to get home. Someone's going to be at the house telling me where to go, like what hospital. I walk in the door and my dad's reading a newspaper. and so I explained to him, I was like, "Mom said you were in a horrible accident." And he just looks at me and he goes, "Your mom is an idiot," and just goes back to reading in the newspaper. So to this day, I've never really talked to my mom about it. He was in a motorcycle accident, but he was fine. Like he got up. It was no big deal. So I think my mom just used it as an excuse for me to come home. But all my stuff was in my car, so I was just like, you know what, I'll stay here for a little bit. That's why I ended up getting a job back in Kentucky, and I lived there for about 8 years. And then at that time, I met my now wife. We decided, let's move out of the city because Louisville at the time was pretty hard to advance your career. If you were in anything other than healthcare, like Louisville has a
Mm.
very strong healthcare economy, but unless you want to work in like an industrial environment or in healthcare, it's really hard to advance your career anywhere. So I had friends in Philly still from my Villanova days, and my wife like fell in love with the city when we visited a couple times. So we moved back here. I moved back here about 7 years ago, and we've been here ever since.
I just want to say, like, your mom's tactic worked. She got to keep you for 8 years
Oh,
because she threatened the death of a loved one. Not to say people should do
so
that, but it did work.
Are your parents still together?
yes, they. It's interesting. I don't think my mom really fell in love with my dad until like 10 years ago, even though they've
Mm.
been married for 38 years now. Um, my my mom is from the upper class of Korean society. It's it's much easier to talk about now because there's a lot of Korean television and movies that are popular that have kind of talked about that. But Korean culture is very much like British culture, where there's a landowning class and a non-landowning class. That's that doesn't exist anymore, but the structure is still built very much around that. And my mom's mom was from the landowning class, and my mom's dad was basically, for lack of a better term, from the slave class. And so my mom's family was trying very hard to break that family apart. And my mom was the oldest legitimate child from the family. So once that happened, they couldn't get divorced. So my mom's side loved her very much, but saw her as the reason why the marriage couldn't end. So she had a very interesting relationship with her mom's family, and so then she marries uh, a, an American Army uh, sergeant, which is seen. I don't know about anymore, but definitely up until the 80s was very much looked down upon. Uh, South Korea and many different groups still see the Americans as an occupying force. They don't see them as a partner or an ally. So there was an interesting dynamic. So my mom didn't want to date my dad, and even though I think there was very much a mutual attraction right away. So what my dad did, so it's a very dark history in South Korea that doesn't really get talked about, but there's a lot of orphans who just didn't have a home. Chances are they're the children of army men and Korean women, and they kind of just get pushed off. Like whether there just wasn't a support structure back then. I think there is now, or it's not as stigmatized. So there was this one girl who lived in the town who was fluent in Korean and English, and my mom only spoke Korean. My dad only spoke English. He could understand Korean, but he couldn't speak it. And so he he would have this kid ask my mom to go out with him, and my mom couldn't say no to this kid. And it was also an excuse. So she was like, "I'm not hanging out with this white army guy. I'm hanging out with this kid." And like that's how they dated for a
Nice.
while. But I mean, it wasn't really dating. It was just them hanging out and my mom and my dad said they tried to find this kid to adopt them after they got married, but they couldn't find the kid. So I don't know what happened. But so that's how they met, and then they actually got engaged 3 months after they met, or they got married 3 months after they got engaged. It was very fast, and so so anyway, then I was born. I was born in South Korea on an army base, and then shortly after, my dad and my mom, we were transferred to an army base in Washington, and that's where my brother was born in Tacoma. Long story short, we ended up in West Germany.
Did you find growing up as an army brat and moving around a little bit, was it harder to make friends, do you think, or meet people?
I think it was very hard for my brother, but that I can't speak for him. For me, it wasn't hard at all, but I don't want to armchair psychoanalyze, even though we're having this conversation. But I was really good at making surface relationships, and not in a way where like I don't want to get to know you. I did. I desperately wanted to get to know people, but I never thought it would last.
Mhm.
Up until college, I never had a friendship that lasted more than 4 years because whether we were moving or whether it's because it was a new school. So when I would hear people when I would hear people talk about their friends that they'd had for like 10 years, I'd be like, we're 18. That means you've been friends with them since you were 8. Like that would just, it was so hard for me to relate to. And every friend I had dealt with a very specific time in my life, whether it was, I had my West Germany friends. So you're talking like really young kids where really your friends because your parents are friends, but you still bonded a lot with them. And then I had my friends from early childhood where you got to actually choose your friends. So that, a lot of people say that's a very strong bond because those are the first times you get to choose your friends. But then those friends I didn't go through puberty with. Those were a different group of friends. And then those friends I lost. I don't talk to anybody from before I was like 13. And then I had my high school friends, and some of those friends are still some of my closest friends who I still keep in contact with on a regular basis. And my high school friends were the first friends I had for more than 3 years.
So you go to Villanova. Talk about how you made new friends, because that was a whole different group of friends. I would imagine.
Yes. So I think I was only one of two people from the state of Kentucky as part of the freshman class. I want to say it was like 1,500 students or 1,600 students. So I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know any upperclassmen who were from my high school. That I was the only person in my high school at the college. So we went to the multicultural society group, and this one girl came and talked to me, and it was the Asian Multicultural Society, and she was talking to me, and I was like, well, that's interesting. This white girl is talking to me. I guess she was there with a friend. She was on the volleyball team, and then I learned she was also biracial. And there's this there's this running joke among biracial Asians that some some are more secret Asian than others, and and at the time I was somewhat more secret Asian, and she was also a secret Asian. She was biracial, and it just blew my mind that I had met someone else who, when you would meet someone, I learned from a young age that if people don't know what ethnicity you are, there's an automatic tension that that needs to get addressed. It is, I wouldn't call it hostility. Some people it is hostility, and I don't know. There's, I'm sure there's theories about it. I forget what the term is for when you see like for instance, like Toy Story had this problem when it first came out. Like people who look real, but something's wrong. They look a little bit off. Uncanny Valley, is that what it's called?
Basically, the need to categorize. Like I need to know, I need
Okay,
to be able to put you in a category, or else my brain can't compute and I can't move forward.
but making friends is very easy in college, especially if you live in the dorms. Like I made sure that I was gonna be in a co-ed dorm. That was the only thing I cared about. It was actually Villanova's still kind of conservative. I don't know about right now, but when I went to school, it was still pretty conservative. So there were still uh, single sex dorm rooms, and I was like, I'm not gonna be in an all guys dorm room. Like I went to an all guys high school. Like I'm not doing that. So the only way to guarantee that you were in a co-ed dorm room was to sign up for basically these classes, and it was a class where you would meet once a week and talk about your experiences. And if you sign up for one of those classes, you would be put in one of those co-ed dorms. So I immediately signed up for one of those classes. I was not taking any chances. I was hedging every bet I could hedge. So
You're no dummy.
I know why people really want the on-campus experience, and it's not to study more. So it was very easy for me to make friends in college.
Yeah.
I definitely floated from friend group to friend group. Like even in college, like my friend group in freshman year was different than my friend group sophomore year, which was different than my friend group junior year. And it wasn't really until later junior year, later senior year that it really started to take on a form that is today, where my closest friends from college are those friends for the most part. There are definitely exceptions, but that friend group from junior year going into senior year was my closest group of friends that I still keep in regular contact with.
Yeah. I can say I'm really close friends with my high school buddies still. And I can't say the same for my college buddies. We were all really tight, but, I was in a fraternity. I did the whole scene. But, I moved away. I moved to LA. And yeah, I rarely, if ever, I'm not on Facebook. So I've lost contact with a lot of those guys from college. High school, I got 3 or 4 buddies that I text with and we call and check in with. So I still have that at least. But yeah, no, I can totally relate to that whole college environment where you do, you're all on the same journey and you're all kind of like so excited about life and about, your college aspirations, life aspirations. But when did you, I mean, I guess, then you graduated, right? And then you got a job right away, or what was that like for you?
So I was not as studious as I should have been. So I did the victory lap, the 5th year, and so uh, my my friends are very academically accomplished, and so I delivered pizzas for a year while I earned the credits I needed to graduate. It was actually probably what really solidified my friendships with my college friends, because no one judged me for that. Whenever I needed help, because it was really hard to make ends meet, delivering pizzas and paying for college classes. That because I was so ashamed of it with my parents. They'd spent so much money to put me through college, and I just didn't put in the effort I should have, or it was just too tough, and I just wasn't willing to ask for the help I needed. So like even a couple of my friends helped me out. Like they loaned me a significant amount of money back then. I think it was like $3,000 or $4,000, just so I could pay my college credits so I could go. And so it was just a really nice thing to know that I wasn't being judged, because you hear that, like that's like once you get out in the real world, even your college friends are they're things are gonna start changing, where your career path is going to dictate your friendships more than your common values and the way you like to spend your time, right?
Yeah.
So it took a extra year for me to get my degree, but at that point I couldn't find a job, because of my grades. I wasn't at the top of my class, and the housing market had just cratered everything. So I decided to move back home, and I was able to get a job as an engineer at UPS. UPS's World Hub is in Louisville, which is just a random place to have it, but it was really easy to get a job back in Louisville. So I reconnected with my high school friends. A lot of my good high school friends. Louisville is very much it's not a big city by any means, but small town, big city feel. Like everyone knows everybody, you run into everybody all the time. No one really moves away, or if they move away, they come back, especially to raise their kids. So I reconnected with a lot of my high school friends, and then connected with their college friends because of that. So it was basically me reconnecting with my high school friends in a way I wasn't expecting, because I was seeing them on such a regular basis. So yeah, so that's probably a big reason why I'm still very good friends with some of the people I have from high school, because I went back and there was those bonds there from that.
So I'm just trying to kind of get us to the place where we can talk about, I guess, where you're at now, right? And sort of kind of do a deep dive. And after graduating college, you obviously you got your career, you moved back to Louisville. So when did you go to Philadelphia?
I guess that's a good way to segue into why we're having this conversation. So we moved back to Philadelphia because I have my friend structure here. There's still a few people who lived in Philadelphia at that time, and they have their friends. So when we moved back to Philadelphia, I thought, these friends, one of them was a very close friend of mine. I was at him and his wife's wedding. He credited me for them meeting in the first place, like him and his wife. That kind of friendship, and I thought, their friend group, them would become like our friend group, and it was great, like the first couple years. But there were like already cracks forming in that friendship that I just didn't see, that my wife saw coming from like a mile away. And it was like I was so blind to it, and I guess my need to have friendships, that I like my wife would bring it up. She'd be like, I don't think you guys are as close as you think they are. You think you are, and I would actually get upset about that. I'd be like, I think you're projecting. I think because you're not close with them, you think I'm not close with them. Then, the pandemic happened, and it was like you took a sledgehammer to all those friendships. Like when actual effort had to happen to actually hang out, like it just dried up. Like
Mm.
some of them, they didn't talk to me for like maybe a year, and I lived like half a mile away.
Yeah.
So it was a very sobering experience to realize that what I thought was a very close, intimate relationship was, while maybe still a friendship, definitely tilted more toward a friendship of convenience than a friendship where you would help each other through hard times. That took a toll on me I wasn't expecting. I almost, you could argue, like I almost felt like very foolish. It was a really hard time for me. My wife was like, you should just go out there and just make new friends. Like you should try to get put yourself out there. And there's two things, and I'm sure Michelle is like very aware of this. I mean, one thing, it was just hard because the pandemic was still going on, so you couldn't just like do social things in general. Like you couldn't join intramural, you couldn't join a social group or anything like that. Even work, like at that time, like most work was still remote work. And and the other thing is, like, guys like do not make really new friendships after they get to a certain age. It's just really difficult. Like usually guys, like their friends are their wife's husbands. Like
Yeah.
their wife meets this group of girlfriends, and like their girlfriends' husbands, and so you just end up finding whatever people you get along with in that husband group, and like that becomes your group of friends once you get to a certain age, other than your high school, college, childhood friends, right? And I was already like very aware of that. There, like I definitely try to find the end of the internet every day. So I have read enough articles that talk about this, and this was even before the pandemic, and that's why I think I felt such a need to keep the friendships I had, because I knew how difficult it is. Because even if I put myself out there, it's a two-way street. So like I started creating this rule where I would ask a guy to hang out, like just in general, and like if they said no, I can't, but let's do it some other time. And if they did like that three or four other times and then just didn't try to then be like, hey, look, I know I've said this. Let's do this now. I'm really sorry. Or these are the reasons why. Like, I'd be like, look, like nothing personal, but I know this isn't, they're not actually caring about making a friendship. They just don't want to be, don't want to be rude about it. So then I realized like most guys are like that. And that's fine. But that's just a fact that I think a lot of guys need to come to terms with. And I don't really know how you change that. And then for me, there's also like, once you, like, let's say you do meet some guy who is like, yeah, like, dude, let's hang out, let's do this. You kind of have to adapt to their friend rules. Like, guys really want to feel comfortable. They don't like to be challenged in general. And I don't mean that in like they're bad people and you need to challenge them morally and ethically. I just mean, if they like playing baseball, you can't be like, let's go play soccer. They'll be like, this is what we do. We play baseball, or,
Hmm.
we talk about sports. Be like, well, I want to talk about something that's going on socially. Be like, that's not our friend group. Our friend group, we talk about sports. Like, that's how we bond.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing you kind of, and these are all things I learned growing up, just different social tools that you realize you pick up without realizing you're picking it up, right? Michelle pointed out, like, you very, very fast, you learn how the social ranking goes in that group. You learn who the alpha is, who the second alpha is, you learn who the guy is that just goes with the flow. You learn who the guy is who vomits all over the place, right? So you have to figure that out in a hurry too, because you don't want to step on the wrong person's toes. Because if I know with my wife, like, she can have an argument with a friend that leaves them both crying. And like a week later, they're like, "Hey, let's hang out."
Mm-hmm.
But you do that with a guy, not that a guy's going to admit they're crying, but if you do that with a guy, that relationship's probably over. And you're never going to even be able to talk about why there might have been a miscommunication. You got to be really careful, like almost like walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
And I know growing up, my mom would tell me, she's like, men are much more sensitive than women. Like, you need to understand that. And I thought she was just digging at my dad. But as I got older, like my mom was 100% right. Like, men will internalize a lot of their grievances and they will not say it. And so you kind of have to guess. You kind of have to figure it out on your own. So dealing with all of that when it's already hard enough, then you got to like walk that minefield. If some guy is like, yeah, man, I'm cool with making new friends. Like, you still got to walk that minefield. They're just saying it's okay to walk that minefield. So there's all that too.
Yeah. I also feel like getting to know you, I feel like the way you grew up, because I kind of take it for granted because I grew up in a small town and we never really moved, right? It was always in that one town. But the way you grew up, moving and having to make new friends, I almost feel like it's made you more aware of the whole friend process and the whole dynamics of that, right? You're more sensitive to it, and you seem a bit more self-aware of it and what goes into it, because you don't take it for granted the way maybe I do, right? Or I did.
Yeah. So when we were in college, a lot of people are like, they talk about what they want to do when they have the money to do what they want, which, that's a whole different topic now, right? Because most people don't have the money that they thought they would.
Mhm.
So, a big thing people was like, I want to travel. Like, I want to move from state to state or country to country. Like, that's what I want to do. And they turned to me and they would think I was going to agree with them. And I was like, nope, I want to pick one town and not move. Like, obviously travel, like, go someplace for a few weeks a year or even a couple months a year, but not move. It's just really traumatic. And I don't mean that in that you shouldn't do it. It's no different than, like, in my mind, like if you break a bone, like, yeah, okay, if you break a bone and it's not at a joint, the argument is that it grows back stronger, right? But it doesn't change the fact you broke a bone. Um, just there's relationships that fall apart that it's through no one's fault. It's just, distance. There's something to be said about the person who you can call and they can be there in 15 or 20 minutes, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
just there's just a level of trust there that you just can't have if that person's like across the country. There's just only so much that person can do to support you, and that person can do things that maybe people you don't have in the city you live in can do. Like that, I'm not trying to take away from that, but if you need someone to help you move stuff out of your apartment, or to come help you out because you broke your leg and you can't go grocery shopping. There's stuff that gets built up, especially I think among guys that you just don't have that if you don't live in the same area. So
Yeah.
And
for me, I was very aware of that.
I think too that it doesn't come as a surprise that the things that you value now are reliability, predictability, steadiness. So I think when you don't get that from your friendships, that has a bigger impact on you because that's what you're seeking now because of the way that you grew up. But I think too, I want to go back to something you said about how hard it is for guys to make friendships later in life. And I think there's two reasons I see for that. And one is that so much of male friendships are predicated on shooting the shit about old stuff, bringing up old memories. Remember when we were, did this and did that. And it's a lot of like nostalgia and swapping stories about how crazy you were. And you can't do that with someone you don't have a history with. So that's difficult. And then the other thing is that men tend to find emotions messy, or the message for them is protect, don't show feelings. And so when you can't be vulnerable with another person, it's almost impossible to find intimacy with another person. And so when you are a stranger to another male and you're trying to connect on some level, it's so much harder to get there, because it's so much higher stakes for men to just put themselves out there. And I think that's protection mode.
Something that I've experienced recently is guys don't really want to talk about how they're hurting, which I think that's what you're saying with like
Yeah.
emotionally, and that's affected my friendships I do have. I've had friends who I know they're hurting, like everyone around them is saying that they're hurting, that they're changing, and they don't want to talk about it. And it's a fine line I know I have to walk, because I know when they're talking with me, they don't want to think about that. They want to be like talk about stuff that takes their mind off of that. When I want to talk about that, and I know if I talk about that, I'm gonna lose them. That they're gonna be like, well, all Jason wants to talk about is how I'm hurting, and I want to talk about everything else. And I know that's look, I'm not jealous of my wife that her friends like talking about how they hurt, because that stuff sucks. It's hard to hear, it's hard to talk about, but at the same time, especially with everything I've gone through recently, there's also that doubt in the back of your mind, like, do they not want to talk about this because they don't trust me enough, or they don't feel
Mm.
close enough with me? And it also goes back to the everyday thing, because if I'm going to hiking with them on a regular basis, or playing basketball with them, or just like you said, shooting the shit about things that used to be right, maybe it would just organically come about, them talking about, what, I am having a really hard time, and I'm having a hard time talking about it, but I see and I talk to these people so little. Yeah, we talk through text, but you're not going to just text someone and be like, I'm having a breakdown. That's, some people do that, I guess, but I don't have personal experience with hearing or saying that. That's another thing where, if you have an everyday relationship with people, maybe you do find those opportunities, but they just don't exist with me right now. So that's another thing. Like, I don't feel like I'm being a good friend to the friends I do have sometimes. And that's its own weight that I feel like I'm carrying.
The question would be, what does it mean to be a good friend? Would it be to like really make them see that they're having a hard time? Or, with women, this in Los Angeles, we have this thing with women where it's like someone gets a lot of Botox and you're like, why aren't her friends telling her she looks terrible? Like, they're not being good friends. But then you get into a situation where that's you and you're like, it looks great. You look great. You look so refreshed. And it's so hard in the moment to be the friend they need versus the friend they want. I don't know if either of you could speak to that on the male side. Men fight the
Oh
friend
yeah.
they need more than women do.
I mean, I look very young for my age. It started being pointed out when we all turned 30, which is when, like, I've always had this theory that certain people look good at certain ages, right? And you don't want to be the person who looked their best when you were early high school. Like, you just don't. You want to be the person who looks their best in their 40s, because that shit carries into your 60s.
Yeah.
But
You want to peak early, right?
yeah, right. So for the people who peaked in college, right? 30 is when things really start to go sideways for guys. Like, you start putting on weight that you can't lose, or your hair starts to recede, or you have certain injuries that just, like, now they're there. Like, you used to be able to play golf, but now that shoulder injury, that you're not playing golf ever again. That kind of thing. Or if you do, you're not going to be able to play 72 holes. You're playing 18. Like, I've definitely noticed that guys they try to get in front of it. They're like, you see a guy who's clearly gained some weight, and who's gonna bring up, oh, you gained some weight? Like, I mean, that's not why we're friends. That's not why you exist. That's not why we're together. But then, boom, like, as soon as they walk right in the door, and they see you, like, yeah, I know I gained some weight, or they'll make some joke about it, and, like, I don't know what you say at that point. Be like, yeah, you tubby son of a bitch. Like, I don't know. I don't know what you do. Like, I don't know if you lean into that, or if you try to console them, be like, look, man, it's not that bad. Like you said with the Botox, be like, look, like, yeah, you gained a little bit of weight, but man, it's not as bad as you think.
You remind me. You said something earlier that kind of kind of sparked a thought in my brain. You get what you give, right? And for me, I sometimes question if I'm giving enough to get it back, and that's on me, because I don't think I reach out enough to my friends as well as I could, and then that consequently maybe I don't hear from them, and I feel like I gotta meet them halfway, and I'm not doing that myself because I get so busy and whatever. And it's funny. I look at my father-in-law, and he is the most jovial guy you'll ever see, and he has so many friends, and he is I mean, he's always talking on the phone with his buddies, and he's playing golf every Thursday. And I look at him, and he's such a model for what I want to be with my guy friends as I get older. Because I can imagine he must have 20 get friends. I mean, I don't know how many friends they have, but anyway, I see that, and I'm like, that's the guy I want to be when I'm in my 60s and 70s. But again, it goes back to like, am I putting Kelly, am I putting the effort forward enough to have those relationships? Because I don't think I am, and I feel like kind of like a jackass and a hypocrite in some ways. But I think it kind of it goes both ways, right? Is that kind of how you feel sometimes too?
I 100% feel that way. I feel that. So when my friend group here disintegrated, I looked at myself and I asked, am I putting in a real effort, or am I just saying that and really I wasn't that type of friend? Because I don't blame anybody for the disintegration of that friendship. They could have just as much thought, well, you know, Jason doesn't put in this kind of effort. I don't, you had to play triage with your friends at that point, right? You had to be like, I have to spend the time with the people that matter to me the most. And they're like, well, Jason's doing his thing. He's not in my orbit as much as these other people. And, when that orbit becomes a little smaller, then you start to think about other things, right? So that made me think a lot about how I don't reach out as much as I should to my friends that I have. And I don't talk to the friends I really cherish as much as I should. But that's also you just get in your own head. So one thing about growing up, moving from social group to social group, you kind of like get in your head, like you kind of try to answer the situations you think you're going to walk into ahead of time. So you have, it's going to sound aggressive, but like a mode of attack. Like, okay, if this happens, I'm going to do this, and if this goes sideways, this is how I'm going to treat it. In order either to, there's like a racism element to it too, that a lot of Black, Hispanic, and Asian people will understand, where you don't want, like us growing up, like you don't want a racial joke to get out of hand, because if someone makes some offhand joke, you got to figure out how to stomp that out without coming off as like a militant Malcolm X type. You got to make it so it doesn't escalate, where then you're like, oh my god, it's gotten out of hand, right? So that idea has just morphed into everything. And it really affected my marriage too, because my wife was like, you keep trying to think ahead of our conversation, and
Mm.
it's making us not be honest with each other. And it's something I've had to try to unlearn, as hard as it is for me to do. And that's the problem with me trying to reach out to my guy friends, because I'm thinking, oh, they're gonna wonder why I'm reaching out as hard as I am. Like, is he in trouble, or is he lonely? And it doesn't matter what I say after that. They're still gonna think that, and I need to get out of that frame of mind. I need to just be more honest and, in the moment about why I'm doing what I'm doing. Be like, because I've met your father-in-law a couple times. Be more like him. Just be like, no, I'm just genuinely happy to hear your voice, and I hope you're happy to hear mine, and I hope we can continue this. Just be more like that.
Mm-hmm.
He also, I just
Yeah.
want to point out, he also has the time now in his, life to dedicate more to friendship. So there's that. But what you're saying, though, Jason, is so important. The idea of transparency, and to not convince yourself beforehand that your truth will be dismissed or not believed. To just say, like, I'm just reaching out because I care, or I miss you, or things boys are never going to say to each other. But finding the words to just transparently say how you feel and why you're reaching out and why it's important to you. That is the solution. It's just a very hard speed bump for a lot of guys to attain that level of language, for their language to match their feelings.
Michelle, I actually have a question about that. Do you find that men are even good with talking about that, because your specialty is marriage or family therapy? And I've heard like a lot of men, they're not really, like, their therapist is really the only person they're actually truly honest with.
Mhm.
Um, And do you find that it's very difficult to convince men that they should talk with other men about this, or is that like once the floodgates open, they're talking with everybody about it, or is it just still like, okay, I got that out of the way, time to put everything back in Pandora's box and get back out to society?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a theme I see over and over again, and I have a lot of males in my practice that are handling things like loneliness and an inability to connect, and that does go towards their relationships as well. But the big thing is what I've seen is men aren't equipped, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but aren't given the skills early in life as they're growing up. So it's a matter of teaching skills that we think, oh, those shouldn't be new to you. You're an adult. You should know how to do this. But to take away that judgment layer and to realize that men have, for very legitimate reasons, a need to protect and to be defensive and to recognize threat. And so there's, the whole fight or flight thing is now fight, flight, freeze, or flock. They've added a bunch of F's to it since the old days. But we can talk about that. But, this idea of kind of a hypervigilance that a lot of men have towards, I cannot show vulnerability because this will result in my pain, my death, my destruction. And that's very high stakes for someone's brain to be telling them, like, don't share right now. So every signal in a guy's brain, usually when they're in a relationship, is saying, don't share, be strong. There are very real consequences if you do share. And so when I see a guy in my practice who is talking about things like this, it's incredibly hard to deprogram that. And it takes time, and it takes friends who are willing to accept that change. Because if you have friends that one day you try and say something and they totally put you on blast, or they stop talking to you, that's a terrible consequence, right? So what I love, Jason, and I think Kelly is spot on to say that you're self-aware, because you really, really are. You end up kind of being the elder person in the room, the guy who can model what it's like to take the stakes down a little bit, to be a little bit more low stakes in how you talk to someone, and to let them know it's not that bad. We're going to be okay. If I share with you that I like you and that I want to hang out with you, or I share with you that I'm having a hard time, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. I'm not here to judge you. So a lot of my work is giving men the language they can start to use with their friends to switch that very pervasive messaging they've gotten their whole life.
Brene Brown talks about being vulnerable, and in her TED Talk, and it's a really great TED Talk if you ever get a chance to watch it. And ever since I watched that, and I've read some of her books, but I really try to be, as I get older, I'm getting more vulnerable.
Even the word vulnerability, but even that word can trigger a defense mechanism in a lot of people. You feel your body tense up when you hear that word, and so then you got to ground yourself back into realizing it's not that bad. The pandemic was, how I just talked about fight or flight, right? The pandemic was like a chronic emergency for a lot of people, which caused their brain to go into their category, right? So they either became fighters, flighters, freezers, or flockers. Very few people flocked, which means wanting to gather with other people and be close to other people for comfort. That's what flocking means. Most people went into flight or freeze. And that's generally the pattern you see in most people anyway, when you're talking about their reactions to crisis situations. And so that the pandemic not only made people do that, but because they were so isolated in their own little bubbles, the communication level just cut off for almost everybody. So it's not like I could say to my friends, hey, I'm someone who freezes in a crisis situation. I'm going to go freeze during the pandemic. I'll see you in 2 years. But so nobody knows what other people are going through, but the majority of people did freeze or flee and just went into their bubble, and their brain couldn't compute. They couldn't handle what was happening.
So I'd like to get Kelly's take on this. So there'll be a little bit of setup, so please bear with me here. But growing up, my mom, she was actually the first person I heard this theory from, which has been put out a lot now. If you're not fluent in another language and you live in that country, automatically knock off 10 or 20 perceived IQ points, just because your level of communication is just that much lower than what people are used to. So it does like, if you're a genius, like unless you somehow overcome that fluency hurdle, like you're not going to be seen as a genius just because it's so hard to convey your thoughts and emotions, right? So my mom, she kind of taught me that growing up. She was keenly aware of that, and it was very frustrating for her because she's a very smart woman, and there's a lot of like racist elements to it too that I'm sure are in play. But big part of it is just because even though she could write just as well as anybody else, like speaking it, because of just the syntax and the grammar, it's just people kind of just knocked her down a couple pegs. So I was kind of taught under that. Like my dad worked a lot, he traveled a lot, so I was basically raised by my mom, even though my dad was a very supportive, comforting dad. So I was still kind of like, I don't want to make my dad feel bad, but it was very much a single parent home for a lot of it. Like my mom is who taught me a lot about how to think and how to act. Growing up, like I was always aware of that. Like I'm 5'8". Like I always understood that people would judge me a little bit different because I'm shorter. People would judge me a little bit different because I'm biracial. I always knew that there was some type of curve, and I reacted accordingly, I guess you could say. What I've noticed in Kelly, this is where I kind of want to get your take. Getting into my late 30s now, a lot of guys are realizing they're not getting the level of respect or admiration or life goals that they thought they were going to have, and I've seen it take a toll on some of my friends, like really take a toll. And these are the people who are being honest about it. They're like, look, I thought I'd be at a different stage in my career, or I thought my family would be different. I thought I'd be traveling the world, or thinking about retiring in 10 or 15 years, right? Um, and I've seen that really take a toll, and I think it's affected some of my friendships in ways that I can't really put my finger on.
Jason, we could start recording a whole new episode right now if you wanted to talk about this topic. I mean, oh my God. Yeah, no, I cannot tell you how much I struggle with that topic and dealing with the pressure I put on myself. And I have, and I talk to my wife about it all the time. These expectations we put on ourselves, especially as men in America, to succeed and to be, to be this person you thought you were going to be when you were younger. And I think a lot of us look at our parents, look at our dads in particular, and we model that a little bit, and then we kind of, that's sort of our benchmark, and then like we hope to obviously achieve more,
Right.
but ultimately, you know, I I struggle with that a lot, quite frankly, and just in terms of, am I where I want to be? Have I done enough? Am I going to be able to do more? And I won't give you my age. I'm a little older than you, but it doesn't go away, honestly. And I don't know if, even if I won the lottery tomorrow, I don't know if it would really like it fill my soul you know, the way it should. And it's not going to address, like, fundamentally, am I making a difference in society? Am I doing enough, you know, to be a good partner to my wife? Things like that. Um, I've developed insomnia as I've gotten older, and oftentimes I wake up in the middle of the night. I've told Michelle this, 3 a.m. is like my new normal. And it's like I wake up and my brain's just going a million miles an hour. And I got to get up and I got to like do stretches, and I got to like, take my mind off, because I just start thinking too much about everything. Like, am I doing enough to not only support my family, but to build a future for us, and I'm kind of, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but from my perspective, it doesn't go away. It's always going to be there. I'm hoping it goes away, when I'm 80, and I can be happy with the life that I've led, and the journey that I've taken. But all you can do is every day get up and say, today's a new day. And what can I do today to make myself a little bit better, or to make this journey a little bit more fulfilling, I think.
So no, you definitely answered it in that I wish more of my friends would talk about it. I wish, because there are things like Michelle has talked about, like every person has different life skills that they develop through their own experiences. And um, I always try to find a learning moment in anything I do. And there was this one, like, dumb like anime I watched one time, and it was like a really good line that I stick with, and it's um tomorrow's you is going to deal with tomorrow's problems, kind of thing. Like don't that's a different person. That's not you. What you're doing today has nothing to do with tomorrow. Today is today. Today's person needs to deal with today's problems, and it's kind of said in a much more truncated way, but like I've learned certain things just because of the curves I've had to deal with of the grading curves, and I just like more of my friends to be honest about that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying what's going to work for me is going to work for them, but it would be just really nice to hear them talk about it, just so we could like exchange notes. I constantly hear about my wife's friends talking about all their different issues, their frustrations in their careers, their frustrations in their personal life, and I never hear that from any of my guy friends, like ever. And I just don't know if it's because they don't trust me with that information, or if it's because guys don't talk about that stuff. Like I just don't know.
I can't imagine that that's the thing. I can't imagine that the issue is them not trusting you, because in just our short time together, I can see that you are very open and willing to talk about these things and non-judgmental. So it's the latter. It isn't the not trusting you piece. I'm fairly confident about that.
Oh, this is all a facade. I'm actually a horrible person.
We can tell. I think
Thank you.
it's hard for guys to be vulnerable to each other, honestly. And I've got 3 or 4 friends that I can be vulnerable with, and vice versa. But after that, it's a very small club, And I think that sort of addresses that question about why guys can't open up to each other as much as they probably could and should. And but what though, you can always set the model. You can always meet them. Like, you can show them what that looks like and how you're comfortable in your skin, and you can go there, and they can learn that from you. I mean, I that's probably one way of, I think, maybe setting that model, of what, so putting it out there, put that energy out there, right? And I'm sure Michelle can probably put a better bow on that than I can.
Well, I think what you guys have to live with is cognitive dissonance. It's that we're not meant to carry these burdens alone. We're not meant to feel all these feelings just by ourselves. And yet that's what we're telling men to do. And so you have to live in this world where you can't do it, but it goes against everything that would actually be helpful to you. And so you're kind of stuck in this limbo. I feel I have heard from men that it just feels unsettling or restless, or, and it also, I guess it depends on how you define connection, right? So if guys think that it's intimacy or their satisfaction with a relationship with another man comes from talking about sports, I feel like that's something that's been conditioned to say, oh, here's some safe topics we have, but that's our way of connecting. And so I feel satisfied by that when I walk away. But you really don't, because that's not enough. And so finding different new ways to define connection and intimacy between friends, and especially between male friends, that's a tough ask.
In my personal experience, for me, it's you guys have talked about how maybe I'm more open and more perceptive, but like for women that I've had experiences with, and gay men too, I kind of think it's more like a hetero male issue more so than a gay male issue. I know I'm generalizing in huge ways, but if you like leave a window open where you're like, hey, if you want to talk about this, we can talk about this. Most women will see, okay, if I want to talk about it, they're open to it. But like with many of the men I've had in my life, like you literally have to build the house around them, make a really nice couch that they really like, then convince them that they're sleepy, and then catch them as they're falling asleep, and then maybe they're comfortable enough to be like, oh, when they wake up, they didn't stab me in the back. Okay, maybe I'll talk about some of my emotion. And you guys have talked about how maybe I am more socially aware enough about my emotions and talking about it, but that's still like if I'm at a C, like if it, like I'm at a C level when I need to be at an A level in my mind to get some of my friends to feel comfortable enough to talk to me about that stuff, or I'm not good enough conveying my own emotions because I don't know how to keep a conversation going. Like if someone does like confide in me or I confide in them, maybe that's a good conversation, but then it's over. Like that's it. Like put a cap on that. We're not talking about that again. Like people don't go back to that well, at least in my personal experience.
I was just going to say it sucks because I've seen the other side. So, like support groups for men, like forums where men can really just talk about, they do flourish. They do end up in that when they have a safe space, they can get there. And that's what's so frustrating because getting them to feel safe to me is the big problem.
Do you consider yourself a curious guy, Jason?
Oh, very much so. In every way.
Because I equate curiosity with like emotional intelligence too, and I feel like you're there, man. You're like you're really smart, and you seem like you're really self aware, and the fact you're even talking to us to me says a lot, right? And I think it's important to be curious and to ask people questions and actually listen. Like there's two parts to a conversation: talking and listening. But ultimately, if you can ask questions, and I love like talking to people and just asking questions. And I don't expect them to ask me questions back, but if they do, great. But ultimately, I don't know. I guess I'm just curious. But it seems like to me, that's really an important part of building relationships with friends. It's like, am I asking those questions, and am I listening too? Not just how's their day, but like, I don't know, just whatever, just things that, things are important to us or important to me.
I agree. I think hearing someone's voice and hearing their voice and picking up on all the pauses and things like that, there really is no way to get around that. Like texting is just not the same thing.
I think a lot of times in therapy, we talk about finishing the thought. So you have this initial thought. So what's end the sentence? And a lot of the times with what we're talking about, ending the sentence means I will feel like less of a man if I share, or if I am vulnerable, or if I'm intimate. So a lot of what I would suggest is starting the conversation with, I will not think of you as less of a man if we have this conversation, and just being transparent about that.
I mean, I know personally, I think many guys fancy themselves the leader. If you're sharing vulnerabilities, if you're saying, "Hey, I don't think I'm enough," that's basically throwing in the towel about that idea. I think that's been my experience, and I'm very guilty of that. I do not, if I admit to a shortcoming, it's in a very self-deprecating style. It's not in a hand on heart kind of way, and I've tried to stop doing that. Just be more open. I think that's hurt me in a lot of ways. Just trying to be not necessarily the funny one. I'm not like the clown, but um, that British style of self-deprecating humor. Like I've tried to really stop that because I don't think it helps. Like it might get people talking. It might not. I don't know, but I don't think it very rarely leads to a conversation that keeps going.
Well, look, Jason, I don't know if this conversation has been helpful or giving you any type of guidance in any way, but I don't know. It's helpful for me to talk about this actually with you because it reminds me of some of the challenges I have too on the same topic.
I mean, speaking of
So,
guidance,
yeah,
sorry, Jason, I just want to say guidance wise, can I offer some feedback?
please do.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I think, this, your wife has already said this, but I love repetition in therapy. I think it's important. And hearing it from different people can really solidify it. This idea that you are thinking ahead too much or anticipating or trying to guess or, kind of figuring out the scenario before you go in. That was a survival skill. That was something that served you really well as you grew up. And what happens a lot in adulthood is we have these survival skills when we're little and they serve us really well. And we bring them into adulthood and all of a sudden they're more of an impediment than a helpful thing. And so you already recognize that you need to kind of break that cycle, but I'm just trying to give you another perspective on why that's important, because I get why you do that, because it made a lot of sense for you to have to, you had all this new stimuli when you were little. You had to constantly be learning new places, new people, new situations. And so that's how your brain now sees everything, is like, I need to figure this out before anything happens. But now that seems to be getting in the way of you being present and kind of going with the flow of trying to have these connections. I don't know if I'm saying it the way it's meant to be said in my head, but hopefully you're understanding where I'm coming from. It's basically what your wife said about, like, don't try to adjust that piece.
I think I understand what you're saying. I've heard from more than one person that it always, like, sometimes I look, or I'm like making a face that I'm like scheming, like I'm trying to plot something, and it's like I'm not really there.
Yeah.
So
So your
I
wheels are
definitely understand
turning.
what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
and you know
yeah.
what that leads to is assumptions and guessing, and not then really hearing what's coming at you, because you've already in your head created the script for it.
I would agree with that.
I used to see a therapist when I was in my early 30s, and she used to always tell me I wasn't being present. And I never understood really what she was talking about. I'm like, I'm right here. What do you mean I'm not present? I'm sitting here. But later on, I kind of learned. And what I was doing was I kept thinking ahead. I was always thinking ahead about this and that and this and that. What am I going to, I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to get this job, and whatever. And it took me out of the now, and I wasn't being present. I don't know. And we did some exercises, and ultimately I was able to like ground myself more. Right. And, I think it helped doing that. I feel like I'm more present now.
Your desire for connection is real and valid and so common. I can't even tell you. So many men have that same exact feeling that you do. So, yeah, I just want you to know that you're not alone in feeling that way. Hopefully, today we've talked a little bit about ways to break through the different barriers to talking to each other.
I I just have one question. I know we're wrapping up, so is there like maybe like one exercise I can do in a social setting with another guy that I can just like practice repeatedly that you would recommend? Like whether it's just asking a question, or just something that you found has like just a good way to kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah, I would say that there is a need for a warm up period. So, as you know, keeping things surfacey and kind of building a surface connection first is important. At some point, though, and I want you to differentiate. Are you talking about when you see a friend who might need help, or just when you're meeting a new person?
Just to let another guy know like I'm emotionally available. Like that can
Mm-hmm.
be a friend, that could be just someone that's obviously not a stranger. I'm not just gonna go up to someone that I just met, but just someone who like maybe doesn't realize that I am open to talking about things that maybe are going on with their lives, or something that they feel like they want to get off their chest. They just don't know who to talk to about it.
I say, yo, you good? You cool? Everything cool? That's what I say. I say, you good?
You good?
And then, that opens. You good?
Yeah, so there's two things. One
That's a
is,
tough question, man. It's a tough question.
it's a great question, and it won't work for everyone. But you know how most guys, when they meet up, they're like, "Hey, how's it going?" or "What's going on?" And then you kind of warm up, and you get that, and
Right.
then you can ask, "Okay, so what's going on, going on?" And if they're like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "Okay, so what's going on that's kind of not perfect?" And you can say, like, "For
All
me,
right,
I'm
so
going through
I'll be
this."
Robin Williams.
Yeah.
But meet him.
I'll be Robin Williams, and in Good Will Hunting, I'll just be like, "It's not your fault," and they'll be like, "What?" And I'll just go, "It's
Right.
not your
It's
fault," and
not
just
your
keep
fault.
keep doing that until they kick me out of the house. Be like, I don't know what his problem is.
No, but it's set the example though. Be the kind of friend you want to be. I mean, be the friend you're expecting them to be too, right? So like open up. Like you're opening up to us, man, and you're like you've got so much great perspectives on these things. I mean, just be yourself, be vulnerable, open up, give examples, talk about what's going on in your life, and I think it's gonna like set that tone for other people, right? I think so. I mean, people are going to see automatically, and I say people, I mean dudes. They're going to see automatically that you're a good guy. I talked to you on the phone the other day, and I could tell right away you're a really good guy. So I
You've
think
got a
that's going to
friend
come
in
through. I
Kelly
think.
for life. Yeah. Kelly wants to be
Yeah.
your friend.
No, well, seriously. Yeah. I mean, no, but I think that's really. I keep saying it. Give what you want to get, right, and just put it out there. Put the energy out there, and I think you're going to get it back, man.
I think too, though,
Yeah.
sometimes saying like, can I share something with you that's been tough for me? Then you share, and then, like Kelly said, you've set a precedent for them to then share.
Some guys have never done that before, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But
I'm
I like
really
the
happy you said that,
invitational
Michelle, because
aspect
that's
of that.
right. Yeah, I'm really happy you said that because that's how I kind of took that when you were like, are you really okay? Because it would just give me a reason to be like, because this is what I'm going through. And obviously I wouldn't just say that if they're getting a burger with me at the drive-thru, but if it was just, us in a, safe situation, I think that's something I need to do better at because I'm waiting for someone to say something so I could say something, but maybe it's just better if I just come out and say it as long as they're okay with hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I need to do a better job with that personally.
Can I tell you a tactic that works well with little kids that I think works well with older men as well?
Please.
Okay. So,
no, those are my only friends.
Yeah, good. Narrating your own experience. And what I mean by that is when you're trying to build social emotional competence in a child and a toddler, it helps to narrate your own feelings as they come. So with my kids, if I lost the game, I'll say, man, I feel sad because I lost the game. Or I stub my toe. I'm like, I'm in pain. I stubbed my toe. And just narrating the feeling. Or like someone cuts me off and my kids are in the back of the car. I say, I'm really frustrated because that person was inconsiderate. And that really frustrated me. And I'm just talking to myself out loud. I'm not saying it to them like, did you see how frustrated I am? No, I'm just saying it out loud. And that it works wonders in building social emotional competence in children. And I've done that in practice when I have male clients, and I found they react in the same way. It just kind of normalizes the idea of saying a feeling out loud without bringing attention to it, without calling them out, in some way or forcing them to do it. But all of a sudden the environment becomes it's more acceptable. You've moved the line, the emotional line for them, where it becomes normal for them to hear you talk about your feelings. Can you see yourself
really
doing that?
And
is
that
that
something I wouldn't have thought to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other question.
I will never do that.
Because that's the other thing is like, what's realistic? Therapists can give you all sorts of things that are like, I would never do that in my whole life. So no, thank you.
Can I do that in the third person? Because that might help.
Jason feels grumpy.
No, Jason didn't really like putting himself out there the past couple hours, but Jason's really going to try to work on himself moving forward. No, that's something I really would have never thought to do, especially given how you're being supportive about this. Because if you would have asked me in a vacuum, I would be worried, like, we talked about getting ahead of myself. I would have worried that it might come off as condescending. If you find that it's actually very constructive, I will try to do that.
It is,
especially if it's helpful.
Yeah, and especially if you're going to share, to be able to say like, you've now asked like, can I share something with you that I'm going through? And he said, yeah, sure, go for it. And you can say, oh man, I feel like a little uncomfortable, or this feels awkward, but I'm going to do it anyway. So here's what I'm going through.
Jason's finding it's very helpful.
Or you can just call them a toddler and say like, man up.
Now you're on the same page. All right, yeah. I'm here.
And I think humor is a great element to all of this. So I don't want you to think you can't be, funny or ever be self-deprecating, because that can also be an invitation. But yeah, I would be careful to use it as your only tactic and or as a way to deflect or not actually talk about what you want to talk about.
Yeah, that's something I really need to work on.
I think a little bit is good, though. I think a little bit of self-deprecation. I mean, I can't imagine not using that as a tool. I do it, and it just kind of grounds me a little bit and makes me a bit more vulnerable. I mean, I do have my flaws. I'm going to point them out. It's like, it is what it is. This is who I am. I don't think there's anything wrong with a little bit of that, right?
I agree. Yeah, no, I said don't eliminate it.
Yeah, I know my problem is, especially if someone starts laughing, it's hard to just pull back from there and just be like, okay, that was funny. time to move on. It's more like I want to keep making that person laugh, and it kind of changes the whole subject, which is not what I want to talk about. So that's something I have to keep in mind when I'm in the moment.
Well, look, Jason, I hope this has been helpful for you just talking about this. I think it's helpful for me talking about it. It kind of reminds me. I realize when I do these episodes, by the way, I say kind of a lot. Um,
I say sorry
speaking
a
of
lot.
subtopics,
Yeah, I
what
know.
are you, Canadian?
Sorry. No, I'm a woman,
Sorry.
apparently. I know we've generalized a lot, and I try not to do that. Men do this, women do this. But I think in this particular case, Jason, like what you have brought up as a topic is a male specific situation. So that's why I, caution to the wind. We're generalizing all over the place. But I want you to
Yeah,
know, even if you didn't
yeah,
get help, I know that Kelly did, because even just mentioning that topic, he resonated with that so much. Sorry to reveal anything from you, Kelly, but like the sense of relief he felt and like, oh man, I get to talk about this thing that I've been feeling. And you put it into words for him when you introduced the topic. I hope that encourages you to know that like so many men feel the same way.
yeah. This like this emotional desert that men tend to go through the older we get is really not worth the 30% pay increase we get over women. And so if we could somehow substitute those things, I'd be more than okay with that. It is really nice to talk about it. It's really nice to know that other people are experiencing the same things. You never want to feel like you're alone, especially in something that you don't want. And
Right.
it's really nice to talk about it, especially in front of people I'll hopefully never meet again. Um, but
No, you're stuck with us
but
for life,
no,
man.
it is it's sometimes it's easier to be honest with people you've never met before. There's no expectation, and it's definitely been helpful for me to talk about it. And I don't know if I would have talked about it in the same way around people who knew me. I really don't think I would have. So this has been very helpful for me, and I really appreciate you two, taking the time to talk to me.
I want to bring up a resource real quick, Kel. I can't remember what the campaign is called now. It's a mental health campaign called like Seize the Awkward or Embrace the Awkward. I think it's Seize the Awkward. And it gives, the website gives a bunch of phrases you can use to bring up to a friend who you think is struggling. And it's really user friendly. So if you want to check that out, it also has some language that is helpful to prompt conversation.
We don't know what this podcast is going to be, but ultimately, this is the kind of conversations we want to have, right? And if we can do this, we can have these conversations, Jason. We can put this out there, and it is the hope. My hope is it can help somebody, right? And ultimately, we can reach one person who's experiencing the same stuff, and they can relate to this, and hopefully, we can put some good out there, right? We talked about like, what am I doing with my life? Well, this is one of those things that I'm trying to do to make it worthwhile, to make my life worthwhile, I guess, or just to do something good. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Like there's a famous line where Cameron Crowe said he made Almost Famous so that his mother and his sister would talk with each other. You know, if this is something that gets anybody that we know to talk with either us or someone they know, that definitely makes it worth it.
Talking with Jason, it really reminded me of where I was when I think I was his age, which is, a decade ago, and being in that place where you're kind of still trying to figure out who you are and what you're doing with your life. You do need connection, because you do need to share what's going on, and you do need to talk about your problems, and not enough guys do that. So I was really happy to talk with Jason and just kind of get his perspective, and he really opened up, and he really, to me, was very well self-aware of where he's at and what he's struggling with, and it's universal, I think, for men.
I completely agree. And I found him to be so delightful and so willing to explore his own needs and how not having that connection impacts him in a negative way, and his desire for it, even admitting that, hey, I have a desire to have stronger friendships. That's a big deal to admit that out loud. And I so appreciate that about him. I thought he was fantastic. And I also think that, like you said, the universality of it, I think a lot of men will be able to relate. And as you get older, your priorities change of like who you want in your life and the characteristics of the people that you want in your life. And you do want to get to a deeper level with people. It's not, you're not in college anymore where it's enough to just want to party at the same time in the same place.
Yeah, and I think it's, for me too, it's quality versus quantity, right? Like
Exactly.
I'd rather have 3 or 4 really, really good friends than like 15, sort of good friends, just surface level friends. So, but you can't have too many good friends. You can't, because every friend fills a need for me. Like, some
Yep.
people are great for one thing, but bad for another. Like I got one friend of mine who, who go nameless, but like it's usually about him, right? But I enjoy that about him. So for me, I'm okay with that. I don't expect a whole lot, but other people are just the opposite. So, and we're not even talking about guys who have women friends, right? Which is just as important as having male friends. So I think you got to have that balance.
I also appreciate that you were vulnerable and that you shared, because one of the most powerful pieces to this is Jason's ability to hear you say, I feel the same way, because that relating, that, see, not the unrelating, the relating, that camaraderie is really what you guys are talking about. This whole show is wanting that piece, that intimacy. So that was very powerful for me to hear you agree.
Yeah, I felt like suddenly I was in your seat and I was being a therapist, which was cool. I thought you offered a lot of really good advice to him, though, and it really made sense. And I think it's going to make an impact in his life.
I hope so. And I as is our goal with this whole podcast, is to impact a lot of people's lives who are feeling a similar way. You can't underestimate the power of hearing you're not alone.
If you're struggling with family, friends, or coworkers, in a bad relationship and wondering what to do, or want a relationship and to set yourself up for success, then we want to talk to you. So make your appointment on Unrelating. Just drop us an email at theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com to be our next guest.